Braves and baseball fans, it's time to take a trip from coast to coast across Major League Baseball.
There it goes, a long drive. If it stays fair, home run.
One strike away. Sandy into his windup. Here's the pitch. Swung on and missed a perfect game.
Fly ball deep left center. Grissom on the run. Yes! The Atlanta Braves have given you a championship. Listen to this crowd.
Left side, Swanson to first. Braves are world champions.
Braves and baseball talk, straight from the diamond. Here's Grant McAuley.
Hello and welcome to From the Diamond. I am Grant McAuley. These are the Kia Studios of Sports Radio 92.9 The Game. It is a Sunday, which means it's a getaway day for the Braves, who continue what has been a very good start to the 2026 season. They're looking to bag another series win, looking to do it against a bunch of snakes out in the desert. They got to win one more to take 3 out of 4 in that series. It has been a very, very good start to the season. We're going to dig in to some of the results, some of the underlying reasons why, some of the very obvious eye test type reasons why. And we're going to size up some of the performances that have helped the Braves get off on the right foot. And I think that, there's a lot of places we can start, but I'm a big fan of right there in the beginning of what a season can be. And when you flash back to a year ago, and I promise we're going to stop doing this because the Braves have been able to exercise some demons very quickly versus what they were in 2025. But I think if there was one thing that Braves fans were looking for from an on-field perspective heading into this season, it's you got to get off to a better start. And last year, anything that could go wrong seemed to go wrong. And there did feel like there was a little bit of a holdover effect in spring training when some starting pitchers started going down left, right, and center. But you were able to, I think, figure some things out in the spring, see some things that you needed to see. And thus far, speaking of things you needed to see, the rotation has more than held up its end of the bargain. I'm going to dig into some numbers that tell you exactly how good the Braves rotation has been. And look, I understand the concept of small sample size theater, and I understand the concept of it's a very long season. But if I had done any kind of research, any kind of poll, any kind of just general expectations before this season and just asked Braves fans, what's your level of confidence in this rotation? Would you expect this number or this number or this number? I don't think anybody would be looking at the numbers that we're seeing right now and saying, that's what I expect the Braves rotation to do, because they came in a little bit undermanned. It wasn't even a talent question. It was a personnel question in that some guys aren't available. And other guys are coming off seasons in which they were, unfortunately, negatively affected by injury. And even though they're back, you didn't necessarily know, are they truly back and to what level? And how much can you depend on them? And there's a lot of this that's going to have to be fleshed out and figured out over the course of the next 4 games. But this is a heck of a start for a team that did not get off to a heck of a start last year. But before we get ahead of ourselves, I want to remind you, as always, you can find From the Diamond wherever you get your podcasts. You can also tune in on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game on Sundays. We're kind of bouncing around here on our start times. We got an afternoon here, some basketball going on, of course. Everybody's got their sights set on what the national championship picture is going to look like. But when that all kind of settles out and maybe some NBA stuff settles out here around Atlanta, we're usually going to be on your Sunday evenings to round out your weekend for whatever the Braves have got going on, and also take a look at what else is happening across Major League Baseball. So make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. I appreciate that. You can also leave a rating and a review while you're at it. That obviously will help the show out immensely. And if you're looking for ways to connect with the show, ways to connect with me, social media is pretty easy. At Grant McAuley on most platforms. You can also go to FromTheDiamond.com. There's a nice little navigation bar that I've designed there for you if you really want to get in on what's going on and what I have going on throughout the season, because goodness knows it's a lot. You can find it right there at FromTheDiamond.com. But let's get back to our discussion here, and more appropriately for starting things out to a season is starting things out in each individual game. And Walt Weiss, who is the new manager of the Atlanta Braves, not altogether new to managing, but he took about a decade-long hiatus because he was, for the most part, throughout the course of that time, the bench coach under Brian Snitker. And that, I think, allowed him to see life from the dugout from a very different perspective than it was at the elevation that he saw it in Colorado. Because while they might have been in the Mile High City, there was nothing mile high about the results that was going on during his Colorado tenure. But it was kind of a crash course, an orientation, if you will, to what managing can look like. And then he got to see, I think it's like the Wizard of Oz when he goes from black and white to color. He came to the Braves. A whole bunch of winning went on. They won a World Series. Nobody necessarily even expected it the way that they did. Expected a couple of those since then, but you won a World Series and you got to see what this organization could truly offer as far as an opportunity to manage, and he was given that opportunity. And I would say, dating back into the winter of my conversations with him throughout the course of the spring training that we've seen, and even the last, week and a half or so, there's just a very good tone around the Braves right now. The energy is good. The vibe is good. And let me tell you why. Winning. Winning is the reason. No, I'm just kidding. That does help. Winning cures a lot of things. But I just think there's a general excitement and the renewal that comes with this new season because everybody wants to put what went on in 2025 and to some extent 2024 when we're talking about injuries as far behind them as they possibly can. And there's still some guys that are searching, I think, in some ways to find themselves, whether that's at the plate or to find their way back in the case of course, some injured starting pitchers that the Braves are still awaiting. Spencer Strider, Spencer Schwellenbach, Hurston Waldrop. I mean, when we dig into this rotation and you realize that those are the kind of arms that are not contributing to this, I think it makes these numbers even more eye-popping. But to get back to the Walt Weiss of it all, I just think that, with this new management, I don't think it's so much about changing the message because the Braves have some very clear expectations. Nothing about that has changed. But the ability to go in, I think, and to motivate and be familiar with who you're dealing with and to know the personalities coming in, not many managers get to walk into a job and have that on their side. I mean, Exhibit A, we may maybe talk about this later. We've got a couple of hours to get into it, but, I mean, San Francisco with Tony Vitello. And it's to say nothing of whether or not he should be a major league manager, but how you ingratiate yourself with your clubhouse and your culture, which is a word, a real thing, in locker rooms, clubhouses, and with teams in general in professional sports and probably amateur sports for that matter. I've had a little experience with that. But from the professional side of things, you've got to understand who you're dealing with and how best to deal with them because a lot of this is, and I know this is something we've talked about over the years, whether this is a pitching coach, a hitting coach, or even a manager, like you're not teaching these guys how to play the game. You may be helping them make some adjustments to get the most out of them, but for the most part, you're massaging egos. That's the way Tim Hudson put it about 20 or so years ago when I started off this crazy ride covering Braves baseball. It wasn't about somebody coming in as a pitching coach, well, you got to teach me how to pitch because I forgot. You didn't forget. You just need that little bit of adjustment. Sometimes it's more of the on the meta level, I guess, if you want to call it that. But be that as it may, let's talk a little bit about the Braves starting pitching before we get completely lost in just random ancillary thoughts that have nothing to do with the actual outcome of the baseball games that we've been watching because goodness knows I've been looking forward to talking about this kind of stuff because last year it just felt like the Braves could not get off the schneid. They could not really seem to ever hit their stride. They could not seem to stay healthy. And thus far this year, some of those things are just off to the side because the winning is what's happening this time around. Braves pitching has been the story to me of the first week plus because Atlanta entered the season with significant questions, particularly in the starting five. And all this group has done is post some of the best numbers in all of baseball. And trust me, I understand that we're talking about a 9-game sample size. I just want to say that again, just enter it in to the record, make sure the court reporter has adequately noted this, because a lot can change over the next, I guess it's 153 games. But the Braves' 2026 rotation has been terrific. A 178 ERA for this group. That's second best in Major League Baseball. Opponents are hitting 177 against the Braves rotation. That's the third best mark in Major League Baseball. For comparison, and I want you to keep this in mind, for about half the year, the Braves rotation wasn't bad last year. But when everybody ended up on the injured list rolling into the All-Star break, some things changed quite a bit over the final 2 to 3 months. But the 2025 rotation was middling in terms of the numbers because of the injuries. 4.48 ERA was 22nd in Major League Baseball. 2.55 batting average against, that might not sound like much to write home about, but when it's your entire staff that's giving up that number, that's the 23rd best mark in Major League Baseball. So in other words, you're on the wrong side of a top 10 you don't want to be on. Guys were getting their swings, runs were being scored, and the Braves rotation, for the most part, as we know, was patchwork. They used 19 different starting pitchers last year. Now, Martin Perez is going to start a game for the Braves on Sunday, so that will make 6 by my math. And I would imagine that we're going to approach 10, 11, 12. That's a manageable number of starting pitchers, but 19 different starting pitchers. I can tell you, somebody who grew up watching the Braves in the 80s and who has watched them go on the run that they've gone on pretty much since 1991, save a year or two here or there, you don't think about the Braves using a dozen starting pitchers, or excuse me, a dozen and a half starting pitchers in a year. That's just a wild thought in general. And obviously that was a franchise record, but it does underscore the fact that you are going to need some other guys to step in and step up, and you're waiting on some big names to be a part of this. But the early returns for this rotation are terrific. Sub-2 ERA and holding your opponents to a sub-200 batting average, yeah, sign me up. And how do you get off to a 6-3 start? Well, you don't allow the other team to score altogether that much, and that's what the Braves have done so far. Now, the 2026 pitching staff overall, a 1.46 ERA, gets even better when you put in the bullpen, and I want to talk a little bit more about them in a moment, but best ERA in baseball, sub-150 ERA. 173 is what opponents are hitting against the Atlanta pitching staff, and if you flash back to a year ago, you could find the Braves around 20th or so in those two categories as far as staff ERA and the batting average against by other teams. And I didn't want to go through, line after line after line after stat because I'm going to tell you that's not necessarily compelling radio. So the job here is not to cherry pick things, but the job here is to try to paint the most accurate picture that you can about what the Braves staff has done. And the reason why they have such a good ERA is because nobody is hitting them right now, and they would certainly like to keep it that way. Now, Chris Sale is obviously the leader of this Braves rotation, and he's been Chris Sale, even when he's sick, like he was on that getaway day against the Athletics. But the two biggest question marks in this group were Reynaldo Lopez and Grant Holmes, and in that order to me, because Lopez had the major shoulder surgery, and I know that Grant Holmes had the elbow injury and decided to rehab rather than undergo a surgery. But both of these guys have quieted, I think, those questions about their status coming off of injury with a couple of solid starts so far. And obviously they're part of the aggregate of what you could argue is the best starting rotation in the National League. And again, stop me if you thought that was ever going to be a statement that we were going to be making in 2026 at all. Because if you flash back to the winter, you already knew about all the injuries from a year ago, so you were counting on a whole bunch of guys getting healthy. You get into spring training, they're not. One of the things that Alex Anthopoulos said verbatim that he wanted to go after was a quality starting pitcher, somebody who could start in a postseason scenario to add to this rotation. So it's not like the front office didn't know, hey, we went through it last year. We need to find a guy that can supplement and not only that, strengthen and maybe even help lead this rotation into October. As I often say, a whole bunch of things have to happen between now and then, but the fact they weren't able to get that guy, whoever that guy could have been, and then they lost major contributors to the 2026 rotation right out of the gate, wouldn't lead me to believe that you'd find this staff in the place that they are. But here they are right now. Bryce Elder has been good, surprisingly so, I think, for some. But this has been a little bit of a roller coaster ride for him over the course of his 4 seasons in a Braves uniform. But he does go to the post. He led Atlanta in starts and innings pitched last year because somebody had to, and it was Bryce Elder. But he was terrific against the A's. He was also great against the Diamondbacks, and I really hate that, not only did he get a loss for that, but he was the one who made the mistake that caused the loss because his throwing error allowed 2 runs to score, and the Braves offense that had scored 17 runs in the first game of the series was held very, very quiet on Saturday night. But still, it's hard to argue with the results of Bryce Elder, and if you've watched the way he's done it, his slider has been terrific. He is mixing his pitches extremely well. He's also been working to, I think, improve his arsenal with a changeup, throwing a cut fastball, throwing a sinker. I mean, he may not be the guy that comes out there and blows you away and does it the old Spencer Strider way or the John Smoltz way where you're going to strike out 10 or 12 or 13 guys and it's just going to look dominant. But all of a sudden, you look up in the 6th or 7th inning and this guy's at 80 pitches. I'll take that. That's ultra efficient. Can get your lineup right back out there to get to work again. But Bryce Elder, Reynaldo Lopez, and Grant Holmes, along with Chris Sale, have been able to lead this rotation thus far. Now, Martin Perez, Jose Suarez, whoever that is, on the back end of this rotation, we'll kind of figure that out as we go along. But maybe Spencer Strider is going to be back sooner than later. That would certainly be nice. Maybe Hurston Waldrop is going to be back a little bit sooner than later. That would also strengthen the Braves rotation quite a bit. And we'll talk a little bit more about both of those guys as we go along. But I got more pitching to talk about. We got some offensive highlights to discuss. We've also got a few guys that are still kind of trying to find themselves. We'll see what maybe is ailing a few of the Braves' big bats. I'll have Brad Rowland of Hammer Territory joining me, coming your way on From the Diamond with Grant McAuley right here on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game and the Odyssey app.
I love baseball. Now back to more Grant McAuley and From the Diamond on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game.
Welcome back into From the Diamond with Grant McAuley on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game. We're live from the Kia Studios. It's a Sunday afternoon in Midtown. A little bit gloomy here, but the Braves, of course, are out on the road. They're in the desert where it does not often rain and where they don't have to worry about it even if it does because they've got a roof over their heads and they're going to try to wrap up a 4-game series against the Arizona Diamondbacks, a club that This has been an interesting series for the Braves, both because they scored 17 runs in the opener and then used some ninth-inning homers to win the second game. Came up short in the third game. The offense has been eerily quiet since James McCann was pitching for the Diamondbacks in the top of the ninth inning in the opener of this series. But that aside, Arizona had just come off sweeping the Detroit Tigers, including beating Tarek Skubal to win those 3 games. So I kind of look at each one of the teams the Braves have played so far as interesting challenges, because you look at the Kansas City Royals, they're a club that expects to be in the playoff picture in the American League Central and the wild card. And I think the Athletics view themselves as a team that should be better than they were a year ago. What exactly they are and how far can they go, especially in a division like the American League West and even in the bigger picture in the wild card in the American League, is yet to be seen. But it's a club that's got some nice young pieces, and the Braves were able to pass both of those tests, 2 interleague series to start out the year. Then they go out into Arizona, which I know some folks have kind of looked at some of these teams and said, well, who are they really? We're not facing the toughest teams in baseball. You may not be. But if you look at where the Athletics were a year ago and where the Diamondbacks were a year ago, they were 2 of the biggest slugging teams in Major League Baseball. And knock on wood, there hasn't been a whole lot of that going on against this Braves pitching staff to start the year, which again underscores how far good pitching can take you and the foundation that it does set to do some winning. And the Braves would like to find some health, have some health on their side when it comes to their rotation, not only for the guys that are already there, you want to keep them around, but also for a potential addition and upgrade, if you will. And Spencer Strider, I think, would certainly qualify as that. As Strider has traveled with the team on this road trip, he is throwing bullpen sessions. Walt Weiss updated that prior to the road trip, that Strider would go with the team out to Arizona and then to Los Angeles, where they'll face the Angels, who I don't think I could say could trick anybody into thinking that they're going to be a playoff team, but you got to beat the teams on your schedule. That's the way that it goes. But for Strider, an oblique strain late in spring training, right before the year got started, has landed him on the shelf. But the Braves are hopeful that they caught this early, and early enough so it didn't mean, well, Spencer Strider's got to sit around for a month with basically no activity whatsoever, because typically, if you really, really strain this thing, depending on what grade it is, that's what it is. And the Dodgers, Mookie Betts, 4 to 6 weeks oblique strain, landing on the injured list on Sunday. So these things can keep you down for a long time. And not only that, for a pitcher, and this could still be the case, and I'm interested to see how many rehab starts Strider's going to get, because I assume it's at least 1, probably 2. Would there be a third? I don't really know. But he had just done all the work of ramping himself up for the spring to be ready for the regular season, and then had to hit the pause button. So you kind of have to go back and do that work again. But long story short, it does seem like Strider's on a faster recovery track for an oblique injury than a lot of players may find themselves. And that, I think, is nothing but a good thing for the Braves rotation. It's going to be a pretty big deal for Spencer Strider as well. And I'm going to ask Brad Rowland of Hammer Territory a little bit about this, because we've all watched Spencer Strider over the course of his career. From the late season 2021 call-up, could this guy who throws 100 miles an hour help us out in a bullpen? Well, he didn't really have to. The Braves were able to win the World Series. They had the night shift back then. But I think we all knew. We weren't looking at Spencer Strider, the bullpen piece. You wanted to see what this guy could do in rotation. And in 2022, he certainly showed you that with just ridiculous strikeout numbers. If it was not for Michael Harris, Spencer Strider's your Rookie of the Year that year. And then in 2023, all he did was set a franchise record and lead Major League Baseball in strikeouts and win 20 games. Then has come the difficult part. And I think we can fast forward through a lot of this history, because we know Spencer Strider missed most of 24, came back in 25, and it was just kind of this up and down affair. And he's still, I think, looking to find that extra velocity or that consistent velocity on the fastball. But more so than anything, and this may be one of those really inside baseball things, but I think, and I believe a lot of baseball fans are pretty savvy to all of this, but it's not just about how hard you throw. It's not even just about where you're trying to put the ball. It's the shape of the pitches. It's the repeatability. There's a lot of mechanical things, and Strider went into the laboratory, as I like to call it, and was able to work with some folks to try to kind of, I think, reclaim the shape of some of his pitches. And what exactly does that mean? Well, it's how the hitter is going to be seeing those pitches and how effective they can be, and how to basically find the ways to beat the hitter to the spot that you're trying to get to. And I don't think Spencer Strider had all of that ironed out, because he had to spend a ton of time rehabbing just to get back on the mound. And then some of it is just making the adjustments start to kind of feel your way back through it, because an injury that causes you to miss a significant amount of time, the way that Strider's not full reconstruction, but that UCL brace surgery that he had, you really have to go through the process of just kind of finding out who you are again. And he'd already been through the Tommy John thing back in Clemson. So he's no stranger to this. And I think that mentally, this is the kind of guy that can handle this, but at some point, and I'm sure for him too, he'd like to kind of ask that question, why do I have to keep handling this? But hopefully this oblique thing is something he's able to get through. And, I felt like the winter really was an opportunity for him to finally reset because he'd gone through the surgery. He'd gone through the rehab for that. So it was really like he'd kind of been at work for about 13 straight months by the time September ended last year. And then he was finally able to kind of stop, have a normal winter, and not have to concentrate so much on the rehab and then the grueling throwing throughout the course of the season. But unfortunately, he's got to deal with this injury, but could be back sometime soon. So that's what's going on with Spencer Strider. Is soon, a couple of weeks from now, 3 weeks from now, before the end of April, which would kind of be what that 3-week timeline would be. I think it's possible. Also on that timeline is Braves catcher Sean Murphy, who has not traveled with the team, but he was back with the big league club on the recent homestand to open the season and has now gone out to do some minor league work, catch some simulated games, and I think he could start a rehab assignment by sometime this upcoming week. And then you've got 20 days, start the clock, for a position player to spend on a rehab assignment. So if you do the math right there, you could have Sean Murphy back before the end of April. And when we looked at this surgery a year ago, or not a year ago, but late last season, you kind of wondered if you were going to see Sean Murphy until maybe late in the first half, just based on how big of a deal it seemed to be to have his hip worked on and the manner that it was and the severity of the injury. But it looks like he's been able to do everything he needs to do to get himself ready to get back sooner. And that, folks may look at it and say from a performance perspective, well, Sean Murphy hasn't been able to replicate, say, the first half of 2023. Well, now we wouldn't know why. But I also think that having somebody, a dependable workhorse-style catcher, somebody that does the things for the pitching staff that Sean Murphy does, you're able to split Drake Baldwin's time between having to be the guy catching 4 out of every 5 days, basically, to the guy that can catch, 3 or 4 out of every 6 days. And it makes a little bit more sense. We'll see what the timeshare is. But Jonah Heim has also been fantastic, just by the way. I mean, he's come in and already been behind the plate for 2 of the Braves' 3 shutouts, I believe, through the first 9 games. And that's something they hadn't done since 1993. And I want to run you through the rotation for that group. It was pretty good. It was Greg Maddux, John Smoltz, Tom Glavine, pretty good, right? Steve Avery, and I believe Pete Smith started the year as the Braves' 5th starter that year as well. And that's a club that won, I think, 104 games and probably brought us the advent of the wild card because the Giants won 103 and got to go sit at home. Be that as it may. I do think that the Braves pitching is heading in the right direction, and having the catchers be able to split their time and create the partnerships that you need to and guys you can depend on every single day brings you the continuity that you want for that pitching staff as well. But getting Spencer Strider back would be a nice boost for this rotation. Nobody else, as far as the injured guys, are close. I don't think Spencer Schwellenbach has really started to ramp all of his things up yet, but he is, I think, seeing some improvement. Hopefully he'll begin some kind of throwing progression soon, and we'll see. But Hurston Waldrop, as I talked about last week, Walt Weiss revealed that when they got in and did the elbow surgery, they found out that it wasn't quite as severe as they feared that it was when it cropped up in spring training. So they're hoping that maybe he's on a little bit of an accelerated timeline. But again, not anytime soon, but sooner than you expected, which is definitely a good thing. Let's talk about the bullpen a little bit, because the Braves bullpen has an 0.92 ERA, the best in Major League Baseball. And I don't think that should really surprise anybody based on the personnel that they have and the big acquisition they made over the winter to bring Robert Suarez in and to bring Raisel Iglesias back. Opponents are batting 167 against the Braves bullpen thus far this year, and they've only walked 3 batters while punching out 25 guys in 29 and a third innings. You talk about efficiency. The Braves bullpen is not coming in and giving the offense any freebies, anything extra, any little advantage. They've been able to really, really, I think, limit in a terrific way what's going on in the later innings of this game. The Braves have thrown the 22nd most innings by relievers so far. And why is that significant? Oh, they haven't thrown a ton of innings. And you want to keep it that way. And that goes back to what the starters have been able to do, and that is routinely get into the 6th inning and sometimes beyond that. You continue to do that, you are going to put your bullpen in the best possible position that you possibly can. Osvaldo Bido and Didier Fuentes, who I do think we'll see Fuentes back as a starter at some point in, 3 to 4 weeks. I think he should be fully stretched out if you needed him for that, if you want to make a change at who's your 5th starter, which, again, Martin Perez is getting the ball on Sunday against Arizona. You saw Jose Suarez get a start, and his really was the only start that you could look at for the Braves and say, that just wasn't very sharp. I know Grant Holmes gave up some runs in his first outing, but I thought he looked good. And that obviously matters as well. But having a couple of guys go in and throw 3 and 4 inning stints as relievers, long men, really helped reset the Braves bullpen in a 13-game stretch in 13 days in which you weren't going to have a chance to really reset your bullpen. So a lot of things have gone right for the Braves, and a lot of things have gone right on the mound, and that I think is pretty obvious for what the Braves have been able to accomplish thus far, getting off to a 6-3 start. But when you look at the flip side of this coin, what has the offense been able to give the Braves pitching? Well, only the Astros, Brewers, and Nationals, what a group, have scored more runs than the Braves this year. The Braves have scored 44 runs. And they do have one huge win mixed in there, a 17-2 victory over the Diamondbacks. I do understand that. But 19 teams in Major League Baseball have played 35 or fewer runs thus far this season, which leads me to believe that, even if you have scored 17 runs in one game and you want to put that off to the side, a lot of clubs around baseball are not exactly ripping the cover off the ball here in the early going. I know it's cold in some places. Summer usually means a rise in offense, and obviously it's a long season, so you're going to have some peaks and valleys. But the Braves have been able to do more than enough, more times than not, for their pitching staff thus far. And clearly the record really indicates that. But the Braves came into Sunday with the best run differential in Major League Baseball as well. But turning in consistently strong pitching, which is exactly what's happened thus far, and getting some timely offense, this is what has the Braves sitting in first place all alone for the first time since May of 2024. That's right. The 2024 season, we know the Braves were a wild card entrant, and it was basically getting in by the skin of their teeth on the final day of the season with a doubleheader against the New York Mets. That was a crazy day. I was at the ballpark for that one. And Arizona, meanwhile, a team that was coming off a World Series appearance, I believe, well, they were the club that got pushed out by losing a double tiebreaker to the Braves and the Mets. Even though you had 3 teams, I think, with the same record, there's just not enough wild card spots to go around. And so Arizona was sitting at home, and the Braves did get into the postseason that year. But you remember this, a 20-9 start to 2024. And then since then, it has just been an uphill battle for the Braves, who won 89 games that year. And then last year had their first sub-500 season since 2017. So when you're getting the things that the Braves are getting here in the early going, I think it's at least just a good indicator that you have the pieces in-house to be a much more competitive team. And we're going to talk about the lineup here in a little while. And I'll ask Brad Rowland about it because he'll be on here in just a few minutes. But you're not getting much out of Ronald Acuna Jr. thus far. And by the way, I'm not overly alarmed about that. And I've told people this for years, and I'll continue to say it until he proves me wrong. Ronald Acuna Jr. can have a slow week, a slow couple of weeks. He can look completely lost. Doesn't happen very often. But then there is that 2, 3 week, 4 week, month-long stretch, or maybe a whole season's worth of baseball in the case of 2023, that just kind of reminds you that, oh yeah, he's that guy. Ronald Acuna Jr. is that guy. He'll always be that guy, and we should have never doubted him. So I would not spend much time in the first week and a half worrying about him. But when he gets going, and I think to some extent when you get Austin Riley going, and I know that's been a couple of years coming because of some injuries and some inconsistency for him, now put those guys with Drake Baldwin and with Matt Olson, who's off to a good start, with Ozzie Albies, who's gotten some big hits for the Braves thus far, with Michael Harris, who we're going to talk about a little bit later too, who I think is in line to bounce back nicely here in 2026. You get Hassan Kim back, you get Sean Murphy back, you've gotten some good things out of Mike Yastrzemski thus far, you've gotten some good things out of Dominic Smith, we'll talk about him later. Mauricio Dubon has been very good at shortstop. I mean, this has really the feeling of a lot of the pieces to assemble a very nice lineup, because I believe it will be. And we haven't even had to bring up, well, how are they going to fill in for Jurickson Profar? Because I think very quietly that question was answered in a hurry by some of the guys who've been contributing to this lineup thus far. All right, when we come back, we will welcome Brad Rowland of Hammer Territory into the show. We'll talk about the hot start to the Atlanta Braves and what else we need to see to keep this thing going as long as possible. Talk about that next on From the Diamond with Grant McAuley on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game and the Odyssey app.
Back to Grant McAuley for more From the Diamond on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game.
Welcome back into From the Diamond with Grant McAuley here on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game, live from the Kia Studios on a Sunday afternoon. Braves and Diamondbacks will be wrapping up their 4-game series, and the Braves are going to be continuing this road trip with a 3-game stop against the Los Angeles Angels. Before any of that happens, though, we are going to talk a little bit about the week that was, or the week and a half that was, for the Braves as they opened up the season. And to help me do that, I want to welcome in Brad Rowland of Hammer Territory, which is part of the Foul Territory network of podcasts and baseball shows and baseball content, and just so much baseball. If you're looking for baseball, that's the keyword here. Brad's got you covered when it comes to the Atlanta Braves. Brad, a very good open to the season for the Atlanta Braves. This first week and a half or so has to be pretty encouraging on the whole. So I guess my first question is, what are your early impressions of the 2026 Braves?
Yeah, first of all, thanks for having me. And it's really an interesting time because of almost the PTSD that happened last year with how bad it was. You know, it's like we're kind of joking when we say things like, hey, they didn't win their sixth game until whatever time it was last year and all these things. But it is true how starkly different that it is. And I was on the team of, not overreacting to the slow start last year. And I probably should have overreacted, I guess, because things did not go. They never dug out of it. This time around, they are in a much more favorable direction, and simply getting off to a positive start, I'm sure, helps with all kinds of things, including clubhouse vibes and also just stacking up wins, basically.
It definitely does, and there are a lot of different things that have changed for the Braves. That's why they're called changes. There are some things that have stayed the same for this club, and that would be, of course, the core, the players this team is built around. But the figurehead of a team, I think it's safe to say, at least for most clubs, is the manager. That's where a lot of the tone is set, whether that is inside of the clubhouse or the outside of the clubhouse, expectations for every team. So what would you make of Walt Weiss in this first? I mean, you saw him through spring training, obviously. We got to see the vibe of the club, but now a little bit of success in the early going. That gives you maybe a little bit more to look at and to parse through when it comes to just, I guess, again, to use that word, because I've been hearing it a lot around the ballpark, is the vibe of this team.
Yeah, and obviously there's all kinds of things that even people that are as close to the team as possible, like you, for example, can't see. Even if you're there every day, you always see everything if you're behind the scenes, right? But everything we can tell from the outside, everything I'm hearing is positive. I've been encouraged by what I've seen with the public-facing decisions, bullpen management stuff, lineups, all the stuff that we can actually see. I've been encouraged by. Everyone seems to be upbeat about the experience in general. It's not a knock on Stitt, of course. Nick did a great job for a long time, legend for the organization, all those things. But through a week and a half, like you said, it's been about as encouraging about Walt Weiss as I can possibly imagine it being, and especially when coming out of spring, where obviously it helps to win, even in spring training when the games don't matter. The vibe's still better when you win. But I think that everyone's saying all the right things, and as much as we can see from this side, I am certainly on the optimistic side about how things have gone so far with Walt Weiss.
Yeah, I mean, you have to appreciate at least the tone that is being set for this club, and the offense has, I think, shown flashes of what it can be, but this is without a significant impact thus far from Ronald Acuna Jr. or Austin Riley, just to name a couple of guys. But when those kind of sluggers get dialed in, I think there's an even better version of this offense, whether that's what Matt Olson has been able to do, Ozzie Albies, Drake Baldwin. We can go on down the list, Michael Harris. There's a lot of expectations for different guys, but I guess I just say all that to say the Braves offense has been encouraging as well, to use that word again.
Yeah, it has. And, some of the underlying stuff is really positive. They're as the time we're talking, they're leading all of baseball in strikeout rate, which is interesting. I'm not the biggest zealot for avoiding strikeouts. There's times when striking out could be not the worst thing in the world, but I think it's a good sign that they're making contact and it's quality contact because they're also pairing that contact with power. They're also near the top of the league in ISO, for example. Like there's a lot of encouraging stuff with that profile. And like you said, I have really no doubt at all about Ronald Acuna Jr. waking up. We saw him in the WBC only 2 weeks ago looking like prime Ronald Acuna Jr., so there's no reason to believe he's not going to do that again in the short term. I'm a little bit more worried about Austin Riley. Not worried, word's too strong, but he just hasn't been prime Austin Riley for a few years, and that coupled with the slow start has my antenna up a little bit. But up and down the roster, Drake Baldwin is no signs of a sophomore slump whatsoever. Looks like a star. And Matt Olson, like up and down the list, sans those two guys, and even Michael Harris. The numbers don't look great, but I've actually thought he's been a little bit better than the numbers so far. So yeah, I think this is an offense that needs to be good, honestly, and so far it has been good.
Yeah, it definitely has. In fact, I was pulling a few of the numbers because that's one of the many things I like to do here on From the Diamond, which, of course, I'm joined by Brad Rowland of Hammer Territory to talk a little bit about the start that the Braves are off to. And offensively speaking, there are a lot of underlying things that make you feel like there's more to come for this Atlanta Braves offense. But when it comes to just good old-fashioned runs scored, only the Astros, Brewers, and Nationals have scored more runs than the Braves thus far this year. They have one huge win mixed in there, obviously, a 17-2 victory will help you out with that run differential, as we always look at. But 19 teams in Major League Baseball have scored 35 or fewer runs. I talked about this earlier. Run scoring thus far this year, at least to me, Brad, on the outside, looks like on the whole for all 30 teams, a little bit harder to come by. So where the Braves are, again, you have to kind of feel good about that offense, especially when you pair it with, I don't know, the best ERA in all of Major League Baseball.
Yeah, I'm less convinced about the ERA sustaining than I am about the offense. And even then, the pitching's been good. But, again, pairing this roster with positive offensive results is not surprising at all. And the fact that everyone knows they have Sean Murphy coming back, they have Hassan Kick coming back at some point, that only strengthens. Those guys are not like, absolute star sluggers, but they are positive hitters and they add depth to the lineup and all those things. So really nothing to be discouraged by, I would say, on the offensive side of things. And, if you pitch like the way they have pitched so far, that pairing is encouraging. You're right. I mean, it is a little bit of fun with numbers to have that 17-run game sprinkled in there. That definitely helps things. But even if you remove that, the underlying stuff still looks fine. Not great anymore, taking that one massive game out, but it still looks okay.
Well, let me stick a pin in the pitching for just a moment because we are going to come back to that. But you brought up a name that I definitely wanted to talk about, and that is Drake Baldwin. We know he has a huge role to play this year for the Braves. He's obviously the primary catcher with Sean Murphy still on the injured list. He's coming off his Rookie of the Year campaign, but I think that he's got another level, and that's not going out on a very shaky limb whatsoever because he's already shown us a lot of signs about why you should be excited about Drake Baldwin, the hitter. I love the fact that he's batting second. That's a place and a move that I was kind of calling for throughout the course of the winter because I feel like those plate appearances should be going to a higher ceiling bat than some of the conversations we were having about what this lineup construction could look like, and he most certainly, Brad, is a higher ceiling bat.
Yeah, I mean, especially when you factor in he's a catcher, and I'm not telling you anything that you don't already know, but the baseline at catcher is always lower than people realize that it is. I make that point all the time because it's true. You look at kind of the league average numbers for catchers, primary catchers, they're not exactly awesome at the plate. So if you can find a star hitting catcher, which is what Drake Baldwin is, who could also receive at a solid to better level, that is a tremendous asset, and he's profiled as a star because of that, like an actual bona fide star. And you go through, it's only a week and a half of games, but 900-ish OPS, more walks and strikeouts. The approach in that 2 slot is really encouraging as well. Gets on base, just a professional hitter, and as young as he is, like it really is a lot of fun to watch him approach the game, and also just when he connects, it goes a long way, which is also positive as well. So yeah, every tool you want for a star catcher for a long time. And man, the Braves just seem to find a way to lock in on these ridiculous catchers, and I mean that the best possible way. So it's been fun, and he seems to be in place to be in that slot, both behind the plate and in that lineup slot for a very long time.
Yeah, he absolutely does. And when you look at his numbers, you have to keep in mind, at least in a few games as I've watched him, he's hit the ball hard and had nothing to show for it a few times as well. Gotten robbed a couple of times, and that's going to happen over the course of a long season. But the overarching eye test, if you will, for Drake Baldwin, yeah, he passes that with flying colors. Now, I don't want to dwell on the Profar suspension because that's old news, but Mike Yastrzemski and Dominic Smith have already made me believe that there's a world where Profar's absence could end up being a relative non-factor, and perhaps this money ends up making an actual impact by paying somebody else before the year is over. Now, a lot of things have to happen before now and the trade deadline, but I've heard Alex Anthopoulos talk about it. When you start prorating out what $15 or $18 million means in terms of the luxury cap hit, they could acquire a player with a $45 million a year average annual value. Those are his words, not mine. I don't know if I necessarily expect that, but it does give them significant punching power, and more to the point, they were able to make some moves that at least lessen the impact of Profar, who, let's just be honest, I'm not convinced what version of that guy we were going to get, even if he was out there, and I can't say I was necessarily that impressed with last year's, which is why, to go back to Drake Baldwin, I'm thrilled to see Drake getting the opportunity to bat second and give those at-bats to a guy that I think deserves them.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing that I was pointing to, obviously no one was happy about the Profar suspension. That was ill-timed and unfortunate across the board, right? The one thing I was a little bit not worried about but flagging was that Profar does profile. No matter what you think about his power uptick, he does get on base, and he always, even when he wasn't hitting for power, got on base. He's a really good approach guy. So I was like, all right, they have to have some guys who get on base. And Baldwin does check that box high in the lineup. I really like the Yastrzemski addition, even before, of course, that happened before the Profar thing, and I was already on board with it. People were kind of, not everyone was, there was some confusion, like, what are they doing with Yastrzemski? Like, don't have a place to play him all the time and all these. But I was like, look, he hits right-handed pitching, and you're going to face more righties and lefties over the course of the season. the price tag was very reasonable. Not a star player, but like certainly fills a role and is what I would call a high quality role player and like does his job very well. The Dom Smith thing has been a revelation early on. I think he'll probably have to cool off from the 1,000 OPS that he has, but he's also hit. I mean, this is a guy who's hit for a long time. It's not a special bat necessarily, but against right-handed pitching, again, like you can plug him in there and get what you need out of him. So part of the appeal of what they did this winter, even pre-Profar suspension, was just increasing the depth. Mauricio Dubon's another example of that as well, and you're seeing that now. Like previous iterations of the Braves would have a hard time if they were down 2 starters to begin the season because they just didn't have the depth. This year and really it became 3 starters with Profar. So being able to sustain that and have a real lineup despite those 3 absences is a credit to the team building that happened before that.
Yeah, I mean, you brought him up. Mauricio Dubon has been really solid thus far. We knew he could defend. We know he's versatile, but his bat has also made a difference in some games over the first week and a half. I don't know how it shakes out when Ha-Seong Kim gets back, but the Braves have a much deeper bench than they have in recent years, as you just pointed out, and some of the names we just talked about are a big reason why. And, you know, I think there's that old saying that when do you build the ark? Well, you build it before the rain, and it seems like, at least from an offensive perspective, at least Alex Anthopoulos was able to put them in a position to be able to weather that storm. Now, putting that aside, the rotation has been really strong thus far. We know what to expect from Chris Sale this year. Then it was question mark after question mark after question mark, and injury, unfortunately, after injury as well in spring training. Reynaldo Lopez and Grant Holmes both have injury concerns, but both have really done a lot to quiet some of that conversation through their first couple of turns. Bryce Elder is not the guy that you expect to have to lean on again this year, but the early returns have been promising for him as well. You factor in that you got Spencer Strider, who could be back soon. I think that a lot of this for the rotation is going to be, and Chris Sale talked about this, you know, it's opportunity. It does create guys who've got to step up, and if they can hold the line until they maybe get some of these guys back, starting with Strider, and then further down the line, Swellenbach and Waldrop and some of the other guys that you might expect, not to mention if they decide to make a move. But to make a long story very short here in the early going, at least you have to feel maybe a little bit more at ease about what the Braves rotation is capable of if they can do the one thing that they haven't been able to do the last couple of years, and that is stay healthy.
Yeah, it's obviously been a positive start for the rotation, especially when you factor in all the absences and what it could have looked like. I'll raise my hand. I've not been the biggest Bryce Elder guy. He's been fantastic. It's only 2 starts, but he's looked great. His location's better than it's ever been by some of the advanced metrics. Like he's pitched the sliders off the charts and all those things, that he's been great. Obviously he's not going to carry a 0 ERA, but I think he's been really good, and that's even just start for start stacking positive outings is very positive for him. And then Holmes and Lopez allowing a combined 5 earned runs in their first 4 starts. Like those guys are injury concerns still, I would say. Like even probably a little bit higher than most pitchers, and there's always pitching injury concerns for anybody. But with that said, it's been what you would want to see from both of them. There was that hiccup at the last week of spring training with Reynaldo where everyone was panicking about the velocity, and rightly so. Even Alex admitted on the radio. He was like, hey, I'm a little worried about this too. Yeah, he called him in and all those things. But Grant Holmes, I think, is always kind of the unsung guy for whatever reason. I mean, I get it. He was not a high-profile guy when they brought him in, and interesting path to where he is now, and he's been the guy that Alex has said repeatedly would have gone to the bullpen if they added someone, but Grant Holmes is a major league starter. Like, he's not an ace, but he can give you quality innings. He has done that repeatedly, so that 5th spot's still up in the air for sure. It's been an adventure for a little while, but, I mean, eventually you're going to get Swellenbach and Strider back, and then he starts to feel pretty good about things. So weather the storm early on, and they've done that so far through a week and a half.
Well, let's talk about Spencer Strider here as we wrap up. This is my last question for you. I'm curious about your thoughts about what this year means to him and what he means to the Braves this year in an ideal world.
It's a big one for him and the Braves. I think that he's the one pitcher they've actually paid as well, that's far on the list of things, but it matters. Like, you've invested long term in this guy, and he, of course, was a Cy Young guy and was one of the best pitchers in baseball. Whether he gets back to that is less of my concern. Whether he could be a frontline rotation guy, like there's a little bit of a gap between where he was and where he needs to be. But I think he does need to be a frontline guy, and I think there's reason to believe he can be. I kind of trust Spencer to figure it out. He may not be the same velocity he used to be, but he's got enough wherewithal. He's so smart, as you well know. I think he can, between the talent and the guile and the way that he operates, can pitch at a high level. Whether it happens right away coming off of the injury, we'll see. But they do need him more in a long-term viewpoint than a short-term one to be, Ace gets overused, but a high-end guy, and they need that guy because Chris Sale's awesome, and Chris Sale's an obviously a proven ace, but Strider being another one would be very helpful.
Yeah, when you were building this rotation and trying to figure out who you wanted to put around a central figure, that central figure was Spencer Strider for all the reasons you just mentioned. Chris Sale obviously has been terrific in his time with the Brave and wants to stay here, signed an extension to do that. The question marks beyond those guys, and really all around this rotation center mostly around injury. And if the Braves can start to get healthy on paper, which the game is most certainly not paid on, as I've said, or played on, as I've said many times, this is the makings of a good rotation, and they have been able to show some, some proof of that over the first week and a half of the season. Brad, tell us a little bit about Hammer Territory and where we can follow your great work.
Yeah, Greg, thanks for having me. Hammer Territory is a Atlanta Braves-focused podcast, Foul Territory Network. We are about 4 times a week or so during the season. It's a lot of content. Myself, Scott Coleman, Sean Coleman, Stephen Tolbert. We'll have you covered across the board. We hope to anyway. We tend to try to have fun as well. Some good bits along the way, but diehard Braves talk, and we try to cover all the bases. Nuts and bolts, analytics, vibes, it's all there for you. So hopefully people can check it out.
Just try to keep yourself sane throughout the course of the season, too. That can be the big challenge. Again, he's Brad Rowland of Hammer Territory. Make sure you are following along with their great work. When we come back, we will keep our Braves and baseball discussion going. This is From the Diamond with Grant McAuley on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game and the Odyssey app.
Here we go now.
Baseball, talking Braves and beyond.
Baseball
With From the Diamond, Sports Radio 92.9 The Game.
And welcome back into From the Diamond with Grant McAuley. It is Sports Radio 92.9 The Game. These are the Kia Studios in Midtown. What is kind of an overcast day. Braves, though, on the road. They continue their road trip. It's 7 games before they get home, take an off day on Thursday, and welcome the Cleveland Guardians to town. The Miami Marlins will be in after them. We'll talk a little bit about what's upcoming for the Braves as we roll on here in the show. But I want to remind you, if you're just joining, this is From the Diamond. I am Grant McAuley, and you can find this wherever you get your podcasts. We'll have weekly episodes throughout the course of baseball season, and you can find 2 hours of Braves and baseball talk right here on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game on Sundays, primarily throughout the course of the season. And then hopefully we can run this whole thing all the way through the month of October. That would certainly be nice. So programming alerts as we get those figured out. But again, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Leave a rating and a review. That would certainly be appreciated. And you can find me on social media, most places, at Grant McAuley. So if you got questions and would like to have them answered, perhaps on the show, perhaps give me some ideas for things to talk about on the show, what you guys are watching out there as the Braves have gotten off to a pretty good start. Would love to get that feedback. I have plenty of baseball discussions throughout the course of the year. So please feel free to shoot those on over. Let's talk a little bit about the Braves offense, because this certainly, as you got into the year, pitching injuries was going to be one of the narratives, but offensively speaking, the question was, what is going to be the Braves' identity? Are they going to recapture some of what they were? I'm not going to say replicate 2023, because that was a record-setting year, the greatest offensive year in the history of the franchise, which dates back over 150 years now, 155 if you're scoring at home. But are they a better version than they were in either 2024 or 2025? The last couple of months of last year led me to believe that, yeah, they could be. But even in that time, they were still dealing with some guys who were trying to work their way through some very prolonged slumps. You were trying to work around the injury for the second consecutive year to your star third baseman, who we'll talk about in a moment. And there were some guys just having down years. And you couldn't seem to get everybody even relatively rolling in the same direction at the same time. And that's going to happen. There are going to be times where just some stuff's out of sync, and you can't count on all 9 guys, obviously, to be swinging the bat at the top level. But it tends to even out over the course of 162, and then you figure out, once you get beyond that, what guys are going to come up with the big hits in the games that matter the most in October. But again, we're a long way from October, as the old saying goes. So how are you going to get there? Well, I think one of the guys that could significantly impact the Braves' ability to put together the lineup they want and thus the runs that they need to score is Michael Harris. And thus far, I think if you've looked at it, you may just take a peek at the numbers and say, well, what exactly is this guy doing that's any different than last year? He's 8 for 35. He's got a homer, 5 runs knocked in. He's batting .229 with a .250 on base. He's only drawn the 1 walk. But I would look at a couple of different things. And number one is I think the quality of the at-bats for Michael throughout spring training and even early on in the year have improved somewhat. I do think he's making pitchers work just a little bit more. Has he gotten to the level that I think he wants to get to? Not necessarily yet. But he's also struck out just 6 times in those 35 at-bats, and he is hitting the ball harder than anybody else on the Atlanta Braves team. And let me remind you, there are some pretty good hitters that hit the ball hard a lot on this Braves team. One of them, named Ronald Acuna Jr., is really not in that discussion just yet. But Harris is leading the club in average exit velocity, which is saying something considering the Acunas, the Olsons, the Rileys, the Drake Baldwins for that matter. But Harris is hitting the ball hard consistently, and he has had some bad luck, which you're going to have over the course of the season. I think the worst is probably on Saturday. He hits the ball 409 feet. That should be a home run in every park. If you hit it to dead center 409 feet, that should be a homer. It's not in Arizona, though, because they've decided to put the wall way on back and have it be about as high as a center field wall has ever been in the history of baseball. But that aside, Harris is hitting the ball consistently, and I think that that is going to turn into some better batted ball luck. He's got 15 balls of 95 miles per hour thus far this year. And you might think, well, where does that rank him in all of Major League Baseball? I'm here to tell you. Only one hitter in all of baseball has hit more balls of 95 miles an hour plus exit velocity than Michael Harris. So he is hitting the ball as hard or harder than anybody else in Major League Baseball. Only Alex Bregman has done so more, and he only has 16 of those. I say only. But he only has one more than Harris has. And you may not be surprised about this as far as Harris's batting profile is concerned. I know Walt Weiss told me that, look, we're expecting the hard contact, but being able to improve his swing decisions, and this is something, if you listened to the show last week, I asked Michael about trying to translate some of his second-half success last year into a good off-season program, a good spring training that checks the boxes that he needs it to, and then turn it into results in the regular season. That's the focus. That's what it all is. Now, hitting the ball hard consistently, not striking out, those are a couple boxes you need to check. Working better counts and making better swing decisions, that I think takes Michael Harris from being what has been a good player for the most part in his career, and I know there's been peaks and valleys, but to a potentially great player and a more consistent player, more to the point. But you may not be surprised about his batting profile because Michael Harris has done these kinds of things over the course of the last 4 years, but I'm sure I can surprise you a little bit with Dominic Smith because I wanted to go back into the StatCast and see, all right, which Braves hitters are really locked in right now? And Dominic Smith is another one of those guys. Second highest average exit velocity and hard hit rate on the team, and by a fairly good margin over Matt Olson. And I think Smith has been a really nice find and obviously a great story. We talked about everything from the human interest side with his game-winning grand slam on day 2 of the regular season and then revealing that he'd just lost his mom who had a battle with cancer. And, you knew that Dominic Smith had himself a special moment there, but you also kind of felt like, and Dominic, to his point, said, look, I felt like my swing is where I want it to be. And he had another long home run out in Arizona, and this seems to be just a nice find against right-handed pitchers in the DH spot. And this could evolve, and I'm here to tell you, it will evolve over the course of the year. I don't know how all these pieces are necessarily going to fit when you do have Ha-Seong Kim back and you do have Sean Murphy back, and we're seeing a little bit of this on Sunday. Walt Weiss said this back in back in the winter meetings when I caught up with him. He's viewing the DH spot a little bit differently. There could be some primary guys in there or somebody getting the primary amount of at-bats, but there's no Marcell Ozuna getting 150-plus games worth of at-bats there. He's going to use that to rest some of his guys throughout the course of the year. Ronald Acuna Jr. is leading off today, but he is DHing for the Braves. Austin Riley is getting a day off. And with 13 games in 13 days, I think this is the kind of just regular kind of maintenance days that you want to give your guys. And they might end up, Ronald obviously is going to get his at-bats. Austin Riley could end up pinch hitting or coming in and being a defensive replacement if you need him to, but you give him a little bit more time off. And if you start to add it up over the course of 6 months, some of these days could be good for the aches and pains because I can tell you, nobody's 100% as you get through this baseball season. They're just not. Relatively healthy, maybe relative is the term for it, you can get as close as humanly possible, but nobody's 100% going through this marathon of a season. So I think that using the DH that way is a great way to give some guys a little time off their feet, but still keep their bat in the lineup. You can give them a day off altogether, and particularly with a demanding position like catcher, I think about how much this could benefit Drake Baldwin. And yeah, you could DH Sean Murphy too, and if he's hitting well, Sean Murphy is a good power bat when things are going well. The power has been there. Some of the consistency hasn't been. But if I'm looking to give some DH at-bats, to make a long story short, Drake Baldwin will be on my short list to give him a little bit of a breather from the duties of being a catcher on a regular basis and knowing that you've got either a Sean Murphy or perhaps a Jonah Heim available to you, and you don't feel like you're losing a lot behind the plate because you're still getting that battery mate that you want to have handling the pitching staff. And I think Jonah Heim has been pretty impressive in a small sample. And there's a case to be made, and I talked about this a little bit last week as well. Once you get Sean Murphy healthy, you still might want to hold on to a third catcher, because then you could use Baldwin or Murphy as a pinch hitter if you need them to, and not have to worry about the possibility that, oh, well, I've burned my second catcher. What if we go to extras, or what if we get into some weird position where it could cause a problem? Or what if there's an injury to the guy that just came in for the other guy because you wanted to pinch hit, and now you don't have somebody, and now we're figuring out, all right, what infielder wants to strap on the catcher's gear and basically be thrown to the wolves? So we don't want to do that. Everybody asks who the emergency catcher is. I guess the answer to that would be Mauricio Dubon, since he plays everywhere else. But you don't want to find that out in a game. You don't want to practically live that out. But DH, we knew there was going to be some moving parts, I think, there. With no more Marcell Ozuna, who signed with the Pirates, and Jurickson Profar getting himself suspended again, I think it just created some more opportunity for Walt Weiss to do one of the things he wanted to do, which was give some guys some time off their feet and also rotate in some players just to keep their bat in the lineup. Ronald Acuna Jr., again, is getting the day off as far as the start in right field, but he will be the DH. And Austin Riley, meanwhile, is getting what looks like could be a full day off. And Mauricio Dubon, to that point, can play third base. It's nice to have somebody that you feel like can come in and play the position and who's swinging a pretty good bat right now. Riley's kind of been going through it here in the early going. Chance to reset, I think, a little bit during a 13-game run to open the year is helpful. His defense has been terrific. Dubon obviously can do a lot for you there. But for Riley, the Braves really need him to step up and be the guy that he was before the injuries of the last couple of years and the other inconsistency in the 100-plus games that he was playing. He would show the power, but just could not find, I feel like, the consistency of his game. The extra base hits were not there as much as you wanted him to be. The consistency of at bats wasn't there. There were a lot of strikeouts mixed in there, and I thought he showed a lot of good things in spring training as far as approach is concerned, but you cannot get overly, I think, drawn in by the spring training stats. Yes, you'd certainly love to have success more than struggle your way through there, but he has drawn some walks. He's not striking out at an alarming rate, but he just seems to be a little bit off. And that was the deal for Austin Riley last year, was he just felt like, and he told me this, his swing was just too steep. And the launch angle and the point of attack where his bat was meeting the ball was just not where he wanted it to be. And that's what he's been working so hard to get sorted out over the course of the last few months. But you get him going, and you get a Matt Olson that's off to the start he's off to. I think a very good start. 7 extra base hits in his first 9 games. He's lead the National League in doubles. Got a couple of homers. Feel like he could have a couple of more. 6 runs batted in. Nearly a 1,000 OPS over the first week plus. A big year from Olson, and when I say big year from Olson, 35, 40 home runs, 100-plus RBI. You've solved one of the big spots in the middle of your order, and Austin Riley, I feel like, is the other one. That's the 1-2 punch that you need. I mean, at the top of the order, it's Ronald Acuna Jr. He's going to set the tone. If you're giving Drake Baldwin those at-bats, as I talked about with Brad Rowland just a little while ago in the second spot, I don't think you could find a better hitter to put there. And if you're talking about Acuna, Baldwin, Riley, or Olson, 3 and 4, then you start looking at what appears to be an Ozzie Albies who's, got some things to prove this year. Michael Harris, Mike Yastrzemski, even Mauricio Dubon swinging the bat really well. I'm not putting a whole lot on him offensively as far as what he needs to do, but when you can get some of the other pieces back, you're getting some, I think, good performance from Dominic Smith thus far. Ha-Seong Kim, Sean Murphy are going to factor into this whole thing at some point. You got some depth in the lineup, and the Braves have been trying to find that. They obviously need the health, but they need some of these guys to show up and do the things that they've done. It was a down year last year for Ozzie Albies, I think worst of his career. A bit of a down year for Matt Olson as well. He had a really sluggish first half, and he was not alone. And then Austin Riley was also not able to, I think, reach the standard he wanted to last year before having to have that core muscle surgery to correct that sports hernia. And he only got half a year on a Ronald Acuna Jr., who, by the way, I talked about this earlier. Just want to throw it out there again. I'm not worried about Ronald Acuna Jr. He's going to get his. He's going to figure his out. And he's going to do the things that make him Ronald Acuna Jr. All right, we're going to switch our focus. Braves and Diamondbacks going to wrap up their 4-game series here a little bit later on in this day, and the Braves will jump on a jet, and they'll head over to Los Angeles, where they'll face the Angels for the first of a 3-game series that'll start on Monday. We'll talk a little bit about the schedule coming up, a little bit about what's going on in the National League East, and, of course, some other odds and ends and good discussions that we've been able to have about the good start for the Braves, quite frankly, to the 2026 season. Sure, there's going to be things in each and every game that you can look at and say, all right, well, it could have been better, this could have been different, this could have been any number of things. That's how it works. We do it 162 times, and if we're lucky, We get to do it for about 4 more weeks in October. But for everything that the Braves had, I guess, to face down, if you will, heading into spring training, the pitching injuries that cropped up, the significant questions about, offensively what this club was going to look like, they've been able to answer most of these things with some really good performances by the starting rotation, excellent work by the bullpen, and some pretty timely hitting thus far for the offense. Though it has not been perfect, it has definitely been worlds better than what the Braves were dealing with about this time a year ago. I had to go back and look because I guess I'm just a glutton for punishment here. But the Braves got their 6th win of the season this year in their 8th game. That's pretty good. You win 6 out of every 8, you're going to go far. Last year, their 6th win came in their 19th game. And you might remember that the Braves, after that 0-7 start, were the fastest team in baseball history to ever find its way back to 500 after losing the first 7 games of the year. And it had only happened a handful of times. But typically, these teams were not digging out of that hole until what looked like June or July, maybe even later in some cases. But the Braves got back up there over the 500 mark in the middle of May. And then they proceeded to fall under for the rest of the season and not be able to find their way back. And this kind of furthered the frustrations that were born out of 2024 because after the Braves' ridiculous hot start and incredible offense in the first 29 games of that 2024 season, they were barely over a 500 team the rest of the way. But the hot start, the virtue of that was they were able to find their way into a wild card spot by the end of the year. But they were 69-64, the Braves were in 2024 in the final 133 games. That might sound anecdotal, but again, 20-9 start to the season, and then struggling the rest of the way. Then last year, 76-86. The Braves' first losing season since 2017, their first year at Truist Park. So they came into 2026 as a club that was just kind of struggling to be a 500 team for the better part of 2 full years. 145 and 150 since May the 3rd of 2024. And if you want to count all of May, we'll give them one more win. 146 and 150. Still nothing to write home about. But the Braves had pretty much been about a 500 club for what felt like 2 full seasons, and that's just not the expectation for the club internally. And I certainly can tell you from covering this team for a long time and growing up watching this team from back in the TBS days, this is not the expectation of the Atlanta Braves year in and year out. But they've been able to get off to a good start this year. As I said earlier, it is a small sample size, but you'd much rather have a good start, good first impression, than whatever it was that we were dealt last year, because that was about as ugly as it gets. You're losing on the field, you were losing off the field, and you were losing guys who weren't going to be back on the field for the remainder of the season the way last year was going. But one of the things I think that we are looking at in terms of like where the true identity of the Braves offense can be found is the guy that leads off on a regular basis. And Ronald Acuna Jr. is DHing on Sunday in Arizona, so opportunity to get off his feet, not have to play right field, but keep his bat in the lineup. Walt Weiss has said, as we talked about, that's something he wants to do for some of his regular guys over the course of the season. I'm curious how long it takes to do that with Matt Olson, but they theoretically can now because they have Dominic Smith. They're carrying an actual backup first baseman for the first time in what feels like a while. I know that some guys have come in and off the roster that could play the position, but an actual second first baseman. Who would have thunk it in the Matt Olson era? But Ronald Acuna Jr. starts at 2026, 161 is the batting average. He's 5 out of 31. I'm still kind of in that camp where I'd rather tell you how many hits and how many at-bats than start talking about batting average when we're less than 10 games into the year. He has walked 7 times, but the alarming thing to me about Acuna is he's only scored 1 run in the club's first 9 games. That is a very un-Ronald Acuna Jr.-like stat. And coming off what I felt like was a really solid showing in winter ball, a good spring training, and a good World Baseball Classic, I kind of felt like he was primed and ready to go. And remember Ronald Acuna Jr. when he was asked, when he showed up for spring training, are you feeling 100% this year? He said, no, I'm feeling 200%. And you can sign me up for 200% on Ronald Acuna Jr. because he's one of the best players in baseball, and you know what that means to the Braves. But you look back in 2025, to get back to this run scored stat, just 1 in the first 9 games. A year ago, even though he spent about half of his time leading off and about half of his time batting third, he scored 74 runs in 95 games. Now that equates out to about 126 runs per 162. And even that is shy of what he did in 2023 in his MVP season, his unanimous MVP season, when he set a franchise record, a modern record, with 149 runs scored in 159 games played. When Ronald Acuna Jr. is in the lineup, typically it means he's going to score a run on an average just about every game. if things are going right. I mean, he's just one of those guys that's going to find his way on base. He did last year at a 417 clip, so you know he can still draw the walks and hit his way on. And I feel like he's hit into some bad luck as well. He's absolutely scalded a couple, maybe 3, that I feel like based on exit velocity and launch angle, you know, the stats that people look at and say, all right, well, yeah, but what was the actual result? But usually these things are predictive of what the result will be, and if he keeps doing this, it should go well. That's the point. I feel like he could have hit 3 home runs to this point. And I don't need him to just hit home runs, though I would be happy for him to hit as many as he wants to for what it would mean for the Braves. If you're covering the team and watching the team and invested in the team in any way, shape, or form, you want to see peak Ronald Acuna Jr. doing those things. It just hasn't happened yet. And that's the word here, yet. I do believe that Ronald Acuna Jr. will get right. And when he does, you kind of forget about these weeks or whatever they are, slow start, slow month, you know, whatever it is. But it's a little bit too early to be talking about, you know, are you worried about Ronald Acuna Jr.? And I have seen that talked about in a couple of different places. I've been asked about it as well. And it's a fair question. The answer just happens to be no. So what do the Braves have going on as we continue here through the month of April? Well, this road trip, we'll see them stop over in Los Angeles to play the Angels. And how about a resurgent Mike Trout? All those things I just said about a guy who can affect the game, a guy that you want to see at his peak level for as long as you can. I mean, sign me up for Mike Trout. I mean, if he never plays another game, he's a first ballot Hall of Famer. But the last 4 or 5 years for him with the injuries and the way that he has been just kind of taken away from us, if you're a baseball fan, I think these are the kind of guys that you remember, you know, when your kids ask you about, well, who did you watch growing up? Or what was it like to watch such and such player play? This is one of the guys that you're going to be talking about. And he looks like here in the early portion of 2026 that the bat speed is back and that Mike Trout might be back. He's out there playing center field again, too, which is no small thing because he kind of wondered, is he ever going to be able to do that again? Will the Angels ever take that chance again? Well, the answer to that was yes and yes. But more importantly, you get a full, healthy season out of Mike Trout. I think it just makes the game of baseball a lot better. I don't know if it's going to fix everything that's wrong with the Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim, California, of Orange County. But it goes a long way towards making it a more enjoyable product. Let's just say that. So the Braves have those 3 games in Los Angeles. It'll start on Monday night. 9:38 is the first pitch there, Eastern time. 9:38 again on Tuesday. Then a 4:07 getaway day start on Wednesday. And then the Braves have on Thursday what I believe is referred to as an off day because they will have played their 13 consecutive games to open the year. And then Friday, you got the Cleveland Guardians rolling into town. 7:15 start on Friday and Saturday. A 7:20 a night game on Sunday for the Braves as well. So some night baseball as they come back home. It'll be the Guardians first, and then it's going to be the Miami Marlins who roll into town. And that starts, I think, a very critical part of the Braves schedule because as much as you wanted to look at the Royals, the Athletics, the Diamondbacks, and the Angels and the Guardians and say, okay, get off to a good start and let's keep this thing rolling, then all of a sudden you get into a whole bunch of divisional matchups. The Braves have not faced a divisional foe yet, but they'll get 3 against the Miami Marlins after the Guardians. Then you will get 3 at Philadelphia and 4 at Washington, so a 7-game road trip there. And then come home for 3 more against the Phillies as the month of April starts to draw to a close. And that's going to do a lot to shape a division race, which obviously hasn't had much time to cook yet. But if you look at it right now, the Braves are 6-3, the Phillies and the Marlins both 5-3, and then you've got the 5-4 New York Mets and the 3-5 Washington Nationals. So again, very small sample size, not a lot of separation here. 2.5 games between the top and the bottom of the division. That sounds about right for the month of April. Well, unless you go 0-7 for the first week. That will certainly put a dent in what you're trying to do, but nobody has fallen flat on their face in that way, and thankfully the Braves have gotten off to what looks like a start that has all the makings of being able to put the pieces together a little bit better than they have over the past couple of years. They're getting the good pitching that they need. They're going to need more of that, and they're getting some timely hitting. But as we've talked about, you still haven't seen the best of Ronald Acuna Jr. yet. You still haven't seen the best of Austin Riley yet. But I do think you've seen some indications from Drake Baldwin, from Matt Olson, from other guys who may not even be the biggest names, whether it's a Mike Yastrzemski or a Dominic Smith or a Mauricio Dubon, that you got some useful pieces here. And if you can start getting all these guys to kind of lengthen that lineup and you get bounce-back seasons from Michael Harris and Ozzie Albies, this thing could add up to a pretty good offense. The pitching, obviously, there's going to be more questions about that. But Chris Sale has looked like Chris Sale. Reynaldo Lopez and Grant Holmes have done a lot to quiet the doubters about their health thus far, but they're going to have to keep going to the post every fifth day. And Bryce Elder has kind of picked up where he left off in the final month and a half or so of last year, which was one of the more consistent pitchers in the National League. And that I think, is the word. That's what you're asking for. You don't need everybody to go out there and toss 7 shutout innings, though you'll certainly take it. You just need consistency. And if the Braves can consistently get this rotation to cover 6 or 7 innings, they've got a bullpen that can shut down just about anybody. And that, I think, is a very big difference from what we've been talking about over the past couple of years. But that's going to wrap us up here on From the Diamond here today. Again, the Braves are going to wrap up their series in Arizona, then head off to Los Angeles, and then they'll be coming on home. Face the Cleveland Guardians this coming weekend. And I believe that's going to be a pretty big weekend as far as new uniforms are concerned. We'll talk a little bit about those the next time we are right here on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game with 2 hours of Braves and baseball talk. It is From the Diamond. You can get it wherever you get your podcast. You can also get it right here on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game. I'm Grant McAuley, and until next time, so long, everyone.